Well, 2016 was easily the biggest year for comic book movies that we have ever had. We had 6 huge releases this year, and I'm going to give my ranking of how those movies all stacked up against each other. We had a lot of highs, a lot of lows, and a lot of surprises. So let's start off with number 6.
Black and blue. God versus man. Day versus night.
Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. This was probably my most anticipated movie of this year. Not only am I a gigantic Batman fan, but I was a gigantic fan of Man of Steel, and I'm not a Superman fan. I've said this in previous videos. I have never really taken to the character of Superman. Even when I was a kid, he was always just somebody that had way too many powers, and those types of characters just never really interested me. And from the beginning of this movie, whenever they started talking about the casting of Ben Affleck, I was on board 100%. I love the guy as a director. I've loved a lot of his choices as an actor ever since he's kind of had this career resurgence as a director, so I was psyched to see what he was going to bring to the character of Batman. And this movie, unfortunately, became a gigantic mess. You know, it was one of those things where the more I heard about it as it was coming out, the less enthusiastic I was and the more worried I was. I never really liked the casting of Lex Luthor. You know, Jesse Eisenberg was never really sold on that. And honestly, Jesse Eisenberg's portrayal of Lex Luthor was god-awful. I don't know if a lot of those choices were his or if they were Zack Snyder's or if it was a combination of both, but just he looked like he was playing a completely different character. It's almost like he showed up to play the Riddler, and then they told him when he got there, hey man, you're playing Lex Luthor. I'm not one of the people who hate the casting of Wonder Woman, but she wasn't somebody that really stood out to me. They just kind of went and got the chick from Fast and Furious, and it was like, that's the best we got. But she did pretty good for the little bit of the movie that she was in it. But the main problem with this movie really is just the writing, because this started off as a Man of Steel sequel, and you can tell watching this movie that they cut chunks out of it and shoehorned in Batman, they shoehorned in Doomsday. They shoved in all of these different moving parts to really just jumpstart this DC cinematic universe, because they didn't want to go through all the time and effort it took Marvel to get to where they were to have the Avengers, where they had all these different solo origin story movies building up to the big team-up movie. They kind of wanted to start with the team-up movie and reverse engineer their model from there and then work their way down to the solo movies. And it just didn't quite work. They didn't pull it off. They could have, but they just made a lot of missteps. They tried to shove way too much into one movie. They tried to make it way too long, and you know, I do like the extended version better, the Ultimate Edition, but I'm just judging it off of the theatrical version. It was a gigantic mess, so it's hard to tell who to blame. Is it the studio's fault because they were trying to shove too much into one movie? Is it Zack Snyder's fault because he tried to make a 5-hour movie whenever he knew he was only going to get a 2.5-hour runtime in the theaters? There's a lot of different fingers you can point. At the end of the day, it was a disappointment. It is a decent movie whenever you watch it at home for the Ultimate Edition, but it was a very disappointing kickstart to what could have been a great team-up movie between Batman and Superman. Coming in at number 5.
Spent so many years peering through time, looking for you.
So Doctor Strange is the 14th MCU movie. This is the movie that was just released this weekend. I went to see it the other night, and I was disappointed. It wasn't really a movie that I had all these huge expectations for, because this isn't a character or a world that I'm that familiar with at all, but I was really looking forward to seeing what they were going to do with this different, you know, astral projection and different dimensions and this weird, wild world that they were trying to introduce with Doctor Strange, because they did that so well in Guardians of the Galaxy, another very strange, off-the-wall, unknown property that Marvel just knocked out of the park. That's probably my second favorite Marvel movie ever, so I had a big expectation for what Doctor Strange could have brought to me. And what I got was a stock Marvel origin story. It didn't take any chances. It hit all the same beats that all of their other origin stories were. I really knew where this movie was going from the time it started all the way to the end. It didn't take me anywhere that I wasn't expecting. It was amazing to look at. The graphics and the special effects in that movie are unbelievable. I think they're going to be a huge contender for the Oscars this year. They're that good. And I liked Benedict Cumberbatch's character of Doctor Strange and his portrayal of that character. The other characters I felt like didn't get enough time to breathe. They shoved in this half-assed love interest with Rachel McAdams. They had good chemistry, but it was just pointless. It never went anywhere, and it took away screen time from characters that we should have seen more for, like Chiwetel Ejiofor's character, who they're obviously building up to be more of a huge villain in the next movie, and the third movie possibly, if they go that far with Doctor Strange, and Mads Mikkelsen's villain. I'm tired of Marvel villains just being throwaways. I know that that's their model. They like putting all the focus on the heroes because the heroes are the ones who are going to carry through into the further movies. But you gotta deliver some good villains once in a while. They have such good villains that they can use, and they just throw them away in every movie. And it's one of those things where it's getting to where I'm not going to forgive them for that as well as I was in the previous movies. It's getting very old for me. So Doctor Strange, I enjoyed it, but it was a little bit too, lack of a better word, generic for me. It was the same old as far as the story progression and where we ended up by the end of that movie. Coming in at number 4.
Forget everything you think you know. You're not students anymore. You're X-Men.
XMen Apocalypse was the much anticipated follow-up to X-Men Days of Future Past, which is arguably the best X-Men movie. My personal favorite is X2, but a lot of people say X-Men Days of Future Past, and I really can't argue with them because that movie is fantastic from start to finish. It was a strange watch at first because it's such a different tone than the other movies and it's such a different pace, but when you watch it knowing what it's going for, it's incredible. And Apocalypse was this gigantic promise that they were going to build upon that, bring in the X-Men's most famous, most sinister villain, and they were going to deliver just an amazing follow-up to Days of Future Past. And they didn't quite get there. I enjoyed the movie way more than a lot of people did. I did not trash it. Like, a lot of people were coming out of this movie saying this is one of the worst X-Men movies ever, and Bryan Singer didn't care, and what the hell is going on? Now X-Men is dead. Give it back to Marvel. It was not that bad. And anybody that says it was that bad is just trying to find reasons for it to go back to Marvel. X-Men Apocalypse is a damn good movie for the first 2/3. I love the new cast of the newly casted young X-Men characters of Cyclops and Jean Grey and Nightcrawler. All of those casting choices knocked it out of the park, especially Jean Grey, who's the one that I was most worried about. I thought that once again Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy delivered great performances as Professor X and Magneto, especially Michael Fassbender. His character arc in this movie is the best character arc, aside from where he ends in the last third of the movie, that I've seen in any of the X-Men movies. He is the emotional grip of this movie, and he was amazing to watch. Apocalypse is where the movie kind of fell apart, because the villain did not get to where that promise told us it was going to get. Apocalypse is supposed to be the end-all, be-all villain of X-Men's, and he was not that. He was cool. I liked the little Egyptian backstory and the opening scene, and I like when he was kind of gathering up his 4 horsemen, especially the scene with Archangel. I love that Metallica song in the background. But by the end of the movie, he's just kind of a generic villain. He never really got to that gigantic stakes that you think of when you hear the name Apocalypse. And the last third of this movie was just kind of a letdown. The biggest negative of this movie, though, is Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique. Stop putting her in the forefront. Just stop. She doesn't care. She doesn't like the character, or she doesn't care about the character. She just wants to come in and be a drama queen. I only want to wear the makeup for 2 days, so that's all you get. And I was throwing my hands up in the theater every time that it would show a scene where she would be in makeup for a second, and then she would just change back to 80s Jennifer Lawrence. And it's just like, Carl Urban went through an entire movie without showing his face, and you can't wear the makeup for a role that you're getting paid out the ass for. It aggravates the hell out of me. So that was my biggest negative with X-Men Apocalypse. It was still a very enjoyable movie. It's not the best X-Men movie, but it is far from the worst. It's a very enjoyable movie. That's my number 4. Coming in at number 3.
Not good. Don't forget, we're the bad guys.
Are you sweet talking me? All of that chit chat's gonna get you hurt.
The back is ready to crack as he raises his hands to the sky. And the girl in the corner is everyone's fun. She can kill you with a wink of her eye.
So Suicide Squad was the movie that pretty much all of our hopes and dreams were hinged upon after the disappointment of Batman v Superman. This was directed by David Ayer, who is a fantastic director. He directed Fury, he directed End of Watch, two of the best war and cop movies that you're going to find. Definitely check those out if you haven't seen them. And this guy was just a fantastic pick for Suicide Squad. This is another unknown property, much like Guardians of the Galaxy, that not a lot of people know about. And it was such a cool change of pace for superheroes because this is a movie focused on the villains and some really famous villains at that. You got Harley Quinn, who's arguably more popular than the Joker nowadays. You got a new version of the Joker played by Jared Leto. You got Deadshot, who's a pretty popular villain for the DC universe. And everybody else is kind of like B and C villains, but they're used very well in this group. I had huge expectations for Suicide Squad, even with all the negativity coming through all the press with this movie, just like they did with Batman v Superman. There's reports leaking about, there's a lot of problems with the script, and there's two different versions of the movie. There's David Ayer's version, and there's the studio's version. And they're battling it out between all of the press screenings, and just a lot of really negative, worrying statements that came out with this movie. And some of them were founded, some of them weren't. My biggest worry with this movie was that Will Smith was going to steal all the screen time from everybody. Did it hurt the movie? A little bit, but not as much as it did, and he definitely stole a lot of screen time. You can tell because they even come out with all the reports, and now we do in fact have the confirmed extended edition when the Blu-ray comes out, just like with Batman v Superman, with all that Joker footage that they cut coming back into the movie. You cut down the Joker to put more limelight onto Will Smith because he wants to be the leader of the Suicide Squad. And Will Smith was damn good in this movie. It's one of the best roles he's had in a while. He's funny, he was kick-ass, but he's still Will Smith. He still wants all the spotlight on him, and that aggravated me a little bit in this movie. Margot Robbie killed it as Harley Quinn. She was phenomenal. I want to see a movie with just her, which we're supposed to be getting eventually. Jared Leto's Joker was something that divided a lot of people, but I really liked his version of the Joker. He was kind of like a demented clown Scarface, and I was not one who walked into this movie expecting him to beat out Heath Ledger's Joker, because let's be honest, nobody probably will ever, in the history of comic book movies, top what Heath Ledger brought to the Joker. It's not going to happen. And you shouldn't expect it to happen. Just walk in expecting something different, and that's what Jared Leto gave us. And I liked it, and I liked his chemistry with Harley Quinn. I want to see a movie with just those two. The two big negatives I had with this movie was the one that everybody talks about with everything surrounding the Enchantress. She was a ridiculous villain. The CGI was terrible with her. It was such a throwaway waste. They should have known that was going to be a disaster. That was just such a wrong move that it destroyed the movie for a lot of people. It didn't destroy it for me, but that was one of the biggest weaknesses in that movie. The second one, which I really haven't heard a whole lot of people bring up, the soundtrack is so jarring in this movie. It's like every single scene cuts to a different greatest hits classic rock song. It is such a blatant trying to be ripoff of Guardians of the Galaxy. The way that Guardians of the Galaxy had that amazing soundtrack of those old love songs and R&B songs, this movie tries to do that with classic rock, and it does not work. Every single scene, like the whole beginning of this movie was giving me a headache. Will Smith comes on, he gets his little classic rock soundtrack. They cut to Harley Quinn, the song just gets chopped right there, and they start another classic rock soundtrack. And then it cuts over to Captain Boomerang, and another one starts. Have you ever been in a car with somebody, and they're listening to the radio or a CD, and they play the first 30 seconds of a song, and they hit skip, they play another 30 seconds, and they hit skip, and then they hit skip, and they hit skip? That's what this movie felt like to me with the soundtrack. I hated it. Some people loved it. I could not stand it. It drove me nuts, and I really hesitate to think that that was a David Ayer decision. That sounds like a studio decision. I really want to see his director's cut. I'm hoping that's what we're going to get with this extended edition. But Suicide Squad was a lot of fun. It was better than Batman v Superman. It could have been a lot better. It should have been a lot better. It delivered on the majority of what I wanted it to deliver on. And it really sets us up with some great villains and some great characters that can be used later on, kind of sprinkled through the next couple of DC Universe movies, especially the Batman movies, because all of these villains were really good in this movie. Now we're at number 2.
Stay down. Final warning. I could do this all day.
Captain America Civil War. Damn, what an awesome kickoff to our summer season. This movie kicked some serious ass. I absolutely love Captain America as a character. I love his movies. They're probably my favorite of the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. That whole trilogy is definitely the strongest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And next to Batman, he's probably my favorite superhero to see on the big screen. Now with this movie, you have Tony Stark facing off basically against Captain America on a battle of morals versus how superheroes need to be managed with the government. Should they have freedom to do whatever they want and just step into any fight or any threat that they want to be able to take out? Or should they be governed by somebody? And what this movie did so well, you walk into this movie thinking that you're automatically going to side with Captain America because his name is on the title, and you think that they're really going to hammer home that Tony Stark is the villain in this movie. And they don't do that. They present really good reasons why you could swing either way. There's a lot of scenes where you're like, damn, I really see where Tony Stark's coming from. And there's a lot of scenes where you're like, man, I don't know though, Steve Rogers, I like what he's talking about. I really believe in him. And you kind of go back and forth in your head during this movie. There's not really a clear good versus evil. It's like good versus good. They just don't know what means to go about being good. The introduction of Black Panther was amazing. I cannot wait for the Black Panther movie. I knew nothing about that character before this movie, and this movie just totally sold me on that character. Chadwick Boseman was badass in this movie. He had some great interaction with the other members of the Avengers, especially Winter Soldier. Their whole back and forth antagonism was really great. The introduction of our new Spider-Man was a huge surprise. You know, everybody pretty much knew that he was going to show up because it was like the worst kept secret ever, but the way that they utilized him was amazing, because in any other movie with lesser directors or with a lesser company, that would have been such a shoehorned in scene. And they fit so well. There's Spider-Man's in 2 scenes in this movie. One of them's an action scene, one of them's just a dialogue scene, and they're among the best scenes of this movie. It really gets you excited for what Tom Holland's going to bring in Spider-Man Homecoming. So this, not only is this an awesome movie, but this is a great preview of what's to come. This movie had some of the best action sequences, especially that airport sequence, that you're ever going to see in any movie ever. Not just a comic book movie, in any movie ever. And you continue to be gripped by this back and forth battle between Captain America and Tony Stark throughout this movie, and it's really emotional where it ends up in the end. Now, there are some negatives with this movie. It's not perfect. I, for one, liked the villain. I thought it was really unconventional how he was just kind of pulling some strings from behind the scenes. He wasn't like a superpowered villain or somebody who's just trying to take over the world. I liked that version of the villain. A lot of people did not. As far as negatives that I thought were glaring negatives, the movie does slow down in spots, and it's a little jarring with how fast-paced the movie gets, and then all of a sudden you're kind of bored for a few scenes. And also, I don't think the stakes were quite as high as they could have been. The stakes are high, but the stakes should have been huge. Somebody should have died in this movie. There should have been somebody who was left dead, fallen on the ground. It should have been Rhodey. You know, that whole scene with him, it looked like he was dead, and that was going to be another reason why Tony Stark is just so hell-bent on taking on this other side of the Avengers. And they kind of cop out at the end. They give him some space legs, and now he's okay. He's fine. And it's just, you know, not to say that you need death in a movie like this, but it should have been that way. It would have made the movie a lot more emotional. It would have made the movie's stakes a lot higher. But even with those few negatives, this movie was an absolute blast start to finish. I think this is the greatest trilogy of superhero movies that we've ever gotten, even over the Dark Knight trilogy, and I can't wait to see more Captain America. Number 1, baby.
Down, down. Like a shit free. I won't be the one ending up on the beat. Please. Was the only thing you can't steal. Just came out to play. Stay out my way.
I'm touching myself tonight.
Go ahead and nuke those chimichangas, bitches, because Deadpool was the best comic book movie of 2016. It started us off in February strong, and no movie has touched it yet. That movie was such a gigantic success that I cannot put into words big enough how great that movie was. I was easily behind Batman v Superman. That was my most anticipated because I love that character. I've never really read his comics, but just the concept of that character I've always loved. You know, a wisecracking smartass, kind of a dick superhero that knows he's a superhero and knows he's in a comic book or a video game or a movie, whatever the hell you put him in. And, you know, I love Ryan Reynolds. Even when he's in a bad movie, I've always just kind of secretly cheered him on. And I've always wanted to see him play this character because you could tell, even in that horrible X-Men Origins movie, you could tell that he wants to be that character, and he is Deadpool. This movie had the greatest marketing campaign of all time, and it delivered in every way. And this movie also proved that you do not need a $200 or $300 million budget to do a good action movie or a superhero movie or a big budget blockbuster movie. This movie was made for like $40 million, and it walked away making almost $900 million. They did so many creative things because of that restriction of their budget that this is one of the things that Hollywood needs to do more to their movies, to not only to save money, but to bring out the creativity of their filmmakers. Restrict their budget, make them stretch it thin, and make them do creative things to make that budget work for the movie. Don't just give them all the money that they need times 4 and let them spend all of it on all these crazy things that they don't need, and then you end up with a movie where you're wondering why I have all this shit that I need to just leave on the cutting room floor that we don't need, that we spent $100 million on that and $50 million on that. Deadpool's proof that it can be done. Ryan Reynolds killed it in this role. We have a first-time director of Tim Miller, and they're pairing together along with the writers that Ryan Reynolds hired, and they've been writing and working on this movie for like 8 or 9 years. They just delivered the perfect Deadpool movie. There's nothing negative I can say about this movie. It's funny. The action is great. Ryan Reynolds is awesome in the role, both on the Wade Wilson side and on the Deadpool side. The supporting cast is really good, from T.J. Miller to, I forget her name, but the girl from Firefly who plays his girlfriend, she's great. The villain is not really a throwaway. You know, he's kind of played to be a comedic plot device. He's not meant to be taken seriously, and it works. You've got the best version of Colossus that we've seen. Colossus is a fucking gentleman, and you respect him, damn it. All the creative ways that they broke the fourth wall, from that incredibly hilarious opening scene whenever they have the titles like, you know, directed by an overpaid douchebag and starring a tool and, you know, a CGI character. That was genius. And just there's so many hilarious and fun things in this movie that it is endlessly watchable. And that is my favorite comic book movie of 2016 by far. Nothing has come close to it. As amazing as Captain America Civil War was, that movie was still 2 steps behind Deadpool. So definitely Deadpool for me was the #1 comic book movie of 2016. I can't wait to see what they bring to this next, from X-Force to Deadpool and Cable. Bring it on now, please. I want it more. Now. So what's your guys' ranking of the 2016 comic book movies? Was this the biggest year in comic book movies ever? Or was this kind of a letdown? Put all your thoughts down below. Put your own ranking. Put what you thought about my ranking, your thoughts about these movies. Let's talk about all of that down below in the comments section. Like and share this video, and please hit that subscribe button. That way you get to come back and see me next time. But if that's not soon enough to check out some more of my videos, you can check out a few more by clicking right over here.